We had great vibes. So today I have a thing for you today. And just in case anyone has to leave early, I'm going to just pause the recording for a second, and I'm going to tell my in-person folks a secret. Hi, folks. We're back. So yeah, so that's pretty much what that's about. And let's see. So yeah, today we're going to kind of like move into a new section of the class. It's our last new section because semester is getting ready to end. So let me really quickly just let everyone know, remind everyone that our final exam is on May 11th, and it's a Canvas quiz with the 24-hour kind of timeline, like the midterm. The final is pretty much the same in format, except there are a higher proportion of short answer questions. And then there are also a few questions where I ask you to actually do something and upload something. So it does take me a little bit longer to grade the final because of that. So you won't get a grade right away. If you do get a grade right away, prepare to have probably a couple points added to it for whatever didn't get graded, which is the file uploads, usually. So just kind of a reminder that that's happening. I know a couple of people got in touch with me about arranging a later date for the midterm because of travel or, whatever, doesn't matter. If that happens, I do really need everyone to know that we need to have the final completed probably by Friday the 12th. So if you're thinking about being late for the final, how about being early instead? Or just email me and let me know what we can work out, okay? Because I definitely don't want to not enter a grade for somebody. That would be bad. So, okay, so we're going to talk about generative art a little bit, and the point of sort of this lecture today is just to kind of put what we're doing in the next couple weeks into some kind of context, into sort of art world context. So we're going to spend some time talking about generative art today and code-based art, and then we're also going to spend some time talking about AI, and y'all can try out your favorite AI prompts on me. And we'll have fun with that. So what is generative art? Well, generative art is sort of a school or a style, or even some might call it a movement of art that is not necessarily computer-based, although most generative art is made with some sort of digital technology. Now, there are lots of examples of generative art that is not made with digital technology, because I'm going to tell you all something that's going to blow your mind. Did you know that before the computer was invented, you could actually do math with a pencil and paper?
What?
Yeah, true fact. So yeah, there is this whole sort of other, sort of genre of people doing algorithmic-based work that isn't necessarily computer-based. And that's kind of fun. So there's a couple of sort of tendencies we can think of with generative art. And there's a couple pieces of baggage, I would say, like psychic baggage that the art world brings to generative art. And a lot of it just has to do with how art sort of slowly, over the period of many decades, adopted computer technology. And was that filled with rainbows and butterflies and kittens? No, it was filled with grouchy people, gatekeeping, and basically artists saying that's not art. So there's two major sort of I would say persistent historical myths about generative art. And in this case, we're thinking about art that is made by instructions, whether they're physical or digital. So the first myth is that code is always executed exactly as written. Therefore, generative art lacks humanity, or as some insufferable folks like to call it, a certain je ne sais quoi. We could also say maybe that it lacks soul. I've heard that before, too. And yeah, all of those things are sort of positions that people might have about digital art. The sort of other myth is that, and this actually flows really nicely into AI art, the artist has zero control and the autonomous machine is just randomly generating the designs, so therefore the computer is making the art, not the artist. It's exhausting. I don't even know what to say about that one. I guess if you think that, writing a prompt or even, writing a prompt is an even less labor-intensive version of maybe coding. But I guess I personally believe that when you code, you make several choices and you use your human agency to do that. We can get into this maybe later in the class period, we can get into this sort of place where maybe we are heading towards some sort of singularity where human-influenced work is indistinguishable from digitally generated work. I can tell you with 100% confidence we are so not there. Because, yeah, I'll show you some of the things I've done on ChatGPT. I made a cat with, it was like a rectangular block, and the cat had one ear that was going this way and one ear that was going that way. It was really sad looking. So in general, I haven't been super impressed by AI work, but I think it's a really good tool. So these kind of attitudes about digital work, I think one thing that people love to, I think right now like AI art is like the new thing to hate on, but a lot of people sort of don't really realize that there's a long history of hating on the new digital hotness, and it doesn't make it any less cool to the people that are interested in it. So that's kind of all I can say about that. So there are some art world antecedents for generative art. In other words, things that happened in art history that pointed towards what generative art might be or what it might look like. One of those things is definitely abstract painting, and maybe more specifically, this is a suprematist composition by an artist named Kazimierz Malevich. So he was really trying to empty art of everything but form. And for the most part, he succeeded in this vein of working until he was sort of, it's really sad, he was sort of like co-opted by Stalin, and co-opt is a really nice word, like he was basically like imprisoned for the rest of his life, and he made Soviet propaganda. But early in his career, he started, with this like really bold, really abstract work. And this work just kind of opened up the possibility for saying something like, instead of one Madonna with, a veil and a babe, I want 10 yellow rectangles, please. And so there's a level of specificity there, and there's a level of precision there that is not sort of in what people would consider more naturalistic art, like images of still lives and portraits and that kind of stuff. So another really famous artist who, he probably passed away like in the mid-2000s, and he was working steadily until then. He got started in the 1960s, and he's often referred to as like the grandfather of generative art. And he was doing generative art when he first started doing it. He was doing it on paper, like with pencils and stuff. And then he became a digital artist, like with the sort of rise of digital technology and art. So he really started doing primarily digital stuff like into the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. But what he really created was this concept, and he was also known as one of the very first conceptual artists. And so what he's basically saying is in this, in a given work of art, what's important is the instructions, that you can draw one line this way, and then another line, and then another line here, another line here, so on and so forth. So he's basically saying that this chalk drawing that I just made, and we might agree that this is the case on multiple grounds, it's worthless. It's totally worthless. It has no value, right? What has value is me literally saying in verbal and spoken language, start with a center point, draw a ray that comes up, and then repeat that ray or whatever 50 times, rotating 10 degrees with each attempt. And so what he did was he created verbal systems for instructing people on how to make his art installations. And this was really important for a couple reasons. One, it's sort of a plain language version of code, I mean, in a very sort of basic way. The other thing that's really important is that this divorced the value of the art from the art object. So this being the art object, if, let's say I paid like $1 million for this art object and then somebody came in and did that, I would be like totally beyond heartbroken, right? Like I would look for my, Pierre Cardin socks to cry in or something, I don't know. And yeah, that would be really, oh, black, damn it. That would be really devastating if that happened. But don't worry, this, as I said, is worthless, and guess what? Because we have these instructions, we can actually make another one. And so, I know. so this idea of like having the instructions or having the idea be the thing that you pay for was pretty revolutionary. And he actually, this is a set of his instructions, but he actually created like, he actually also, incidentally, this guy also was a stockbroker. So he created, can you kind of tell by the type of work he makes? And so he actually created like a little certificate where, you could get the instructions for this given piece, and then the certificate was what he would sell for sometimes, millions of dollars. And so he definitely sort of figured out the art market in that way. And then you get, also in the 60s, you get people, and this kind of goes back to our very first lecture in class, you start to get people who are like, oh my God, I got this awesome engineering and research tool. How do I make it do something unexpected, or how do I make it do something that might sort of deviate from what I might need to do if I'm using it for an engineering drawing, for example. And so then you basically get the advent of generative art. And so in this particular work of generative art, which is made by one of the major early practitioners of computer art, George Neise, he starts off with a sort of predictable system, and then as the code ostensibly, iterates down in the y-axis, he's adding kind of an element of chaos. We could say definitely that's mostly rotation, but there's also some position change too. So this is like, I would say, extremely typical. This is like a prototypical example of generative art. And then you also get this artist who, if you're really interested potentially in feminism or like feminist sort of ways of making art, Vera Molnar is a really fantastic figure. She's like 90-something, and she's actually still making this work. And it's hilarious in a way because her computer is like this big, but she still uses this sort of like computer that she bought in the 1980s. And so she's making pretty much, I would say Vera Molnar was one of the only early practitioners of generative art that was female. So yeah. And then of course, obviously getting into, the current, further into sort of contemporary history, things start to get a little more sophisticated, a little more complex. And what we find in like the 2000s and on is that this sort of device, otherwise known as your laptop or your primary sort of computing hardware, can actually do quite a lot. And we start to see code tools emerge in the 2000s that basically take the computer science sort of degree out of the equation. So I sort of have like a personal relationship to this history. In the 90s, I did study computer science. And I remember not really understanding anything about programming until I was able to do it for visual art. And I think that some of that is that old educational thing of that you don't invest energy in learning things that you don't want to learn. And so for me, like moving a button around the screen in Visual Basic, which is what we did in CS at the time, was like the most demotivating thing that I possibly could have done, but making computer graphics was something that really felt like I was actually doing something and getting somewhere. So these tools started coming out around the sort of millennia, and most of the tools are based on C-derived languages, like Python was a relatively recent intervention, P5.js, which we're going to use hopefully on Monday, and then also thinking about Java as a sort of thing. So a lot of this sort of like, I would call this, maybe not early, I would call this like late recent computer generative work is based on C. Whereas a lot of the early computer art was actually based on hardware code like assembler. So anyway, some other sort of like recent trends in generative art, and this is definitely one of those places where generative art can lead into like 100,000 different directions. One direction that it can definitely lead is towards data visualization. And so I think that data visualization can be a really powerful tool for a lot of things. There was definitely a moment in the art world, like within the last decade, where data visualization was just everywhere. People had to have it. I think especially artists that are working with issues relevant to social issues or scientific issues, the data visualization can be just absolutely key. There are also artists who work with data visualization and actually work with it in a way that it does not educate and does not sort of tell people new things, but that it sort of functions more like an abstract painting, which is just a different way of maybe thinking about it. And then, of course, as we sort of like move forward in history, generative art also starts to get a lot more, the potential for complexity grows, but also the potential for generative art to look like other things grows. And so in this case, I feel like we're sort of definitely at some point where this could be an abstract painting, but it isn't. And so that idea of, sort of like generative art that wants to be maybe pure form versus generative art that wants to sort of explore other things like texture or color, its relationship to maybe images, kind of dovetails straight into what we now think of as AI art. And I think I'm not much of a gatekeeper, like I philosophically don't believe in it, but that's kind of what academia is based on, in case you haven't noticed. So, we kind of define these areas, and then we think about what doesn't fit or what does fit. And so a lot of people ask me, is AI considered generative art? And I guess maybe I would say, I don't know, probably not. I would say probably not. I don't know if anybody has any different opinions. To be honest, I really don't know. I mean, there are people writing about that right now. I think that definitely it is a generated art when you make an AI-generated art. But I think there are some people out there who feel very strongly that generative art is made from human-authored code. So I think that as we sort of head towards whatever AI singularity we're heading towards, we'll kind of figure that out and get more detail on that. I think one thing that I've been asking myself, like, will 5 years from now, will we need to code anything? And I guess I would argue that one of the reasons that I code, I could definitely use various apps to probably get the same result, but one of the reasons that I code is because I actually like having knowledge about how things work. And that when I have that knowledge about how things work, I can make creative choices that other people aren't making. And then I get special snowflake powder and I feel good about myself. So I mean, seriously, that's just, and I actually do like coding. But yeah, do I code, for example, HTML pages anymore, like since the 90s? Of course not. No, it's just like, it's not worth my time, it's not interesting, because it's just become something that, has kind of like lost its allure. So sometimes with code tools, they're sort of like, or just digital tools in general, like you're always kind of chasing, what might be possible. So AI art, I'm actually way more interested, just as an artist, I'm way more interested in AI art that doesn't do its job or that kind of fails. Just because I feel like it's way more interesting than, a perfectly executed kind of AI image. So I'm going to show you a couple of images that are sort of thinking around like the history of, recent history of AI art, and then also thinking towards, how AI art actually works. So this is an AI-generated landscape, and this is definitely like really typical of like early, I would say this is early, it's from 2018. So like early AI-generated art was kind of just 100% weird. There was nothing, 5 years ago, if you used an AI generator, there would be no recognizable faces, none of the things that are considered kind of hard. And so, as we all know, like in the last year or so, AI-generated art has kind of like increased its facility by a couple orders of magnitude. And I have to say, like, that being said, I still actually really appreciate the sort of like wrong AI generation. And as we know, AI generation or AI-generated algorithms basically work from a training set. So let's say all of these like original images are part of the training set or part of the sort of execution set, and then we sort of get to the result at the end. I think that we probably aren't going to have like a huge amount of time to discuss this in class, but there's been a humongous amount of scholarship about the ethics of the training set and how the training set is determined, what's in the training set, who owns the data that's part of the training set. And those are all super interesting questions that are kind of like outside of the scope of this class, But I think we can definitely sort of think about them. More AI. This is another really great early AI image where it's, in some ways, like I find the wrongness of it to be utterly amazing. And I didn't sort of like compile a lot of contemporary, like today AI, because we're going to actually get in there and look at it, and I'll just show you my sketchbooks in those different apps. So there is a short article here from the New York Times about how sort of AI is progressing, and then there's another interesting article from Wired about how AI art is sort of affecting how people put together exhibitions and curate exhibitions. So those are just some interesting perspectives if you're interested in that. In terms of actually making your own AI work, I would definitely probably just go through these tools in order. So Night Cafe Studio is like a really accessible kind of free version. It's free until you decide that you want to do something cool, and then it asks you for, to buy credits. Pretty much every single AI image generator that I'm aware of will ask you to pay either right away, or it'll ask you to pay after you run out of your first 100 credits or something. So just to give you an idea, like probably all of these images, I did multiple steps to kind of get to them. And I don't think I spent more than $20 on the credits. So you can get pretty far with that. The thing I like about Night Cafe is that they let you they let you upload one of your own images, and then you can kind of evolve an image. So you work off of a text prompt in this case, and then it sort of gives you the opportunity to insert a start image. So the start image that I included for this, I don't think they have the original start image available, but it's basically like an underground cave that I filmed in England. And then I just added to the prompt, I think I added something like cats in a nebula. And so one of the things that I specifically like about Night Cafe is that it gives you this option of sort of using a training image. So I think that's the only one where I actually used a training image. And yeah, here I'm sort of like, I'll just read you the prompts. This is a Victorian fern underground. This obviously is super weird, and have you noticed that the cats like sort of don't know the AI doesn't know the difference between cats and ferns, which I thought was really funny. And then this was not maybe as successful. This is just Victorian fern garden, so it looks kind of generic. This one I used academic art as a modifier. So academic art is this that's a style of French painting that's like super detailed and super, kind of like color aware. And again, I think we're having like, confusion between cats and ferns, which I really liked. And then here, I think I added the prompt for a glass house. And for some reason, it decided, oh, well, if it's a glass house, you need to add these like weird people things. And then I just want to say, that is most certainly a dog. And also that is a dog. So I think I killed almost an entire month just like working through some of these variations. I also love the fact that like, when you're working with an AI image generator, like you think you know what ferns look like, but it sort of has its own ideas, right, about what that might be. So Night Cafe, I just like the process and some of the extra process tools, but, and Night Cafe right now is using Stable Diffusion as its sort of underlying engine. There's also DALL-E 2, and so I definitely will be spending time possibly on Monday, possibly on Wednesday, showing you how to use ChatGPT as a debugging tool for code, which I actually think, I've tried ChatGPT for a lot of different things, and the code debugger is one sort of situation where I can say, it is mostly right, and it is mostly useful. I cannot say that about all the other things that I've tried ChatGPT for. But yeah, so if we go kind of like into DALL-E 2, and this is just like a free kind of Google login, I'll just walk you through what I did this morning. So this, I think, says Mutt Cram Nuggets. I'm pretty sure that's what it says. This was like a catacorn trampling my dreams. This one definitely wants to trample my dreams. And then I tried a catacorn trampling my dreams in a tropical setting. That's not a catacorn. That is a tiger-acorn. Yeah, this fake text is really even like more disturbing than I can possibly imagine. And then this is a herd of catacorns trampling my dreams in a tropical setting. And then this is a herd of catacorns pretending to be gods in a tropical setting. So one of the things that I really love about DALL-E as a tool, and we had a graphic designer come in and talk to us about using DALL-E as a brainstorming tool, is that you get this sort of history of multiple versions, and it kind of iterates through. So you can kind of work in one session and just get this really great log of everything that you've done. And so this is, let's see, a herd of catacorns pretending to be gods. Okay, it's the same thing. A herd of catacorns pretending to be gods in an underwater setting. I actually like this one. That one turned out pretty well. And then an impressionist oil painting of same. This started to be less good, actually. So I tried to do a photo of a flock of catacorns flying through a nebula, and pretty much DALL-E, my interpretation of this result is just like whatever. Like it hardly even tried, And so then I thought I needed to like ease it along a little bit. So I said a photo of a flock of catacorans flying through a nebula digital art. Oh, and if you put digital art at the end of your prompt, that makes everything better. Why? I do not know. I mean, you can apply other style modifiers, like any style of art that you can think of is in there. And sometimes one of my favorite things to do, if I have a couple of colleagues that are like really well known, I will actually try to like Google things in the style of their work. So that's always fun. So maybe we'll say like. So I Googled a catacorn eating pizza in the style of Linda Berry. So Linda Berry is one of my colleagues. She's a cartoonist for The New Yorker and has a bunch of books out. That is pretty close. That is actually pretty awesome. I love this one. Oh my God, I'm totally going to send that to her. Okay. Any other prompt suggestions? Take some requests here. Garfield? So pretty much, yeah, like I definitely am of the opinion that the AI image generators have pretty much like changed entertainment forever, or at least my own personal entertainment. Like it's so much fun. And I do really like sort of, I mean, there are certain things that obviously like if I put my brain to it, I can draw or I could make a collage in Photoshop, but the immediacy of it is just so great. And it's not, I don't know that I would even maybe use these images as like themselves as art, but I think as a tool to get from whatever's in my brain to whatever that might actually look like. I think that's where AI art is sort of like filling a gap, Any other prompts? That was a great one, yeah.
What am I going to do tomorrow?
Definitely the more abstract sort of prompts are really interesting. It's really, yeah, it's very inspiring. Yeah, definitely one thing that I'm thinking about sort of doing in the class in the future is for the collage assignment in Photoshop, I was thinking about asking people to have at least one of their images be an AI image, just to kind of like introduce y'all to the tools and stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much like how AI image generators work. We'll get into ChatGPT a little bit at a future time. I do want to take a couple of minutes to just introduce you to the next kind of code tool, or the only code tool that we will be using in this class. It's called P5.js. And for those of you that are sort of like code-friendly, have experience, I would say that, yeah, P5.js is basically just a JavaScript port of a language called processing. And so if you already know JavaScript, you probably would be in a good place to, hit the assignments from a kind of advanced perspective. If you have no coding experience whatsoever, guess what? That's what this class is actually intended for. So we're going to start with sort of pretty basic stuff. If you are using code for the first time, there is on both of the code-based assignments, there's a beginner track and there's an advanced track. There's no difference in terms of the grading standards. I just want people to not be bored. Okay, so if you're worried about being bored, maybe do the advanced track and try some things that you haven't tried before. If it's your first time coding, definitely please do the beginner track. So basically what you get in the P5 editor, which we'll be using in this class, is you get a sort of opportunity to draw things to the so-called screen. And so right now, it looks like we're drawing a gray background. Woo, gray background. I know, it's not that exciting. But there are certain commands that we can use, and I'm going to go over all of this stuff in detail, so don't worry about it. So in this case, I'm actually going to draw I'm drawing an ellipse. And I'm trying, if I could spell. To draw that ellipse, I have to provide it with 3 parameters. And so those parameters, I'm going to put them over here in a comment real quickly. So this is kind of a generic sort of view of what you would need. To draw an ellipse. So there's 4 sort of, these are called arguments that go inside. This is called a function. Again, we'll talk about all this later. But basically, each function has a set of sort of data points that it's expecting to receive in the form of arguments. And so here we're seeing, this is just coming from my brain, but it's also in the reference. We're seeing that an ellipse has an x, a y, and then a width and a height. And so here, I'm assigning it to mouse x, which is the x coordinate of my mouse, and then also mouse y, and then 100, 100 on the size. So by assigning it to the mouse coordinates, I can have it dynamically drawn each frame. And we'll talk a little bit more about frames and how they work. But yeah, you basically made your first interactive arts. I know, very, very little. So we're going to spend more time with P5 in general, but definitely if you maybe take a look at the So I have pretty much all of the code for this course in a giant collection, and it's right here. So if you wanted to look at some of this code, I would definitely do it in its own tab. And then we can look at maybe one of the early examples. Let's look at diagonal motion. So the code opens up in the editor, and then you hit this play button, and you can basically preview it in the window. And then it does whatever it's supposed to do. So in this case, some of these examples are just like illustrating like a really simple point. So there's no animation in this one. It's not 3D. This example is solely showing you like how things draw on top of each other. That's the purpose of this. And so we'll talk about this like kind of more at length on Monday. But I think it would be super great if y'all could kind of go ahead and at least experience the P5 editor. And you would basically, let me see if I have a link to it. Let me add that just to make, oh, here, it's under links and tutorials. And then there's some of my early code examples. There's a couple of explainers here. Again, we're going to go through all of this stuff in class, so I'm just going to put a link to the editor sort of at the root level of the module so that you can sort of make sure you can find it. I'll put it on today. All right. So yeah, if you could just get into the editor, kind of check it out. You could definitely check out some of the early examples or also look at the Getting Started tutorial. I think if you did look at specifically at the Getting Started tutorial, that would probably help maybe a little bit if you're feeling like already kind of overwhelmed. I would definitely spend some time with that before class on Monday. It'll just make you feel like you're sort of a little bit more on top of things. Any sort of last questions or prompts before we head out?
Part 1 and 4. This is our class. Part 1 to 4 class. That's a prompt.
Okay. Wow. I wonder if that would be the same without the 104. I'm just curious because I can't imagine that there's anything in the training set about that. I mean, so the training set for most of these actually sort of only goes up to 2021. So if you're looking for media references or anything that has happened after that, it'll just kind of come back null. If you do it in ChatGPT, it'll just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. How? A what?
A poodle with wings flying over a fantasy forest.
Also, don't forget, if you're going for that extra credit point, just send me a personal email. And also, while we're on the topic of extra credit, I don't add the extra credit to your grade because Canvas won't let me do extra credit. So I add it to your grade manually when I post final grades. Wow, that is just so wow. So wow, much poodle. All right, that's pretty much how the world is going to end. So I'll see you all later on Wednesday.